Word. I'm a biblical scholar, and I care very much about what people do with what they find in the Bible. And I'm having technical difficulties today, so I'm going live from my phone instead of through StreamYard. And so we're just going to see how this goes. And right? We just roll with things. When you're thrown a curveball, you just adjust, right? So I don't know. Can people hear me? I'm just going to do this. Yeah, I just saw some love, so I'm going to keep going as if you can. Thank you. Hey, Anita. Me too. Okay, so what I was going to do today was pick up in Genesis chapter 9, where we left off last week. We read through the two different flood stories, and I did that by reading them separately. In chapter 6 through 9, there are two flood stories that have been woven together. Thank you for letting me know, Ronan Ostag. Two stories have been woven together in those two chapters. And so a colleague of mine a couple decades ago pulled them apart so that you could read them separately. So we did that last week. I read through those two stories separately, and we noted at the end of those two stories, there are two separate promises that are made, right? One is that God will never again flood the face of the earth. The other is that there will always be seasons. And both of those have interesting promises, right? Both of those are interesting promises. And they're promises that you can perhaps understand why people would use a story to make that comment or to make that promise to people, right? And then we talked about, and some comments came in afterwards, the issue here is that people deal with floods, right? And so one of the things you can do with this scary part of your reality is to use it to a positive end. And one of the, thank you, Ronan of Stag, for the super chat or the love. I'm not sure how a super chat works here, so I think it's just give me some love. I appreciate that. One of the things you do with a scary part of your reality is you turn it into something, right? You do something positive with it, or you use it as a way to talk about something else. So lots of people experience floods. So the fact that we have two different flood stories woven together in Genesis chapter 6 through 9 tells us that the people who are recording these stories experienced flooding, or their ancestors did. So that's one of the fun things about the Genesis flood stories, is that shows us that the people that are writing these stories aren't strictly from the land of Canaan, Palestine, right? Because you don't have flooding in that part of the world. Right? You have flooding in other parts of the world where the Tigris and Euphrates come together, or the Nile every year, right? At the mouth of the river. So that's a lovely kind of way to think about the people travel, the stories travel, right? Are passed along, all kinds of great things there. Okay, so that's where we left things. Am I supposed to click on this or something? I don't know. No. Okay. Nope. Okay. Like I said, this is new to me. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to read, since I can't project it onto the screen that I'm aware of, right? I'm going to read from where we left off in chapter 9. And I'm sad I can't use StreamYard today, because I was going to point out, kind of wrapping up what we were talking about before, where I was pointing out that at the beginning of chapter 6, there's this funny language play on words that happens. In the Hebrew, it's ha'adam, and the translation committees sometimes translate that as human, and sometimes they translate that as his name, as a man's name. And it happens again, and it's kind of interesting, but it happens again here at the beginning of chapter 9, and the thing is that in chapter 9, verse 6, which is written kind of poetically, so perhaps this is a saying that was already out there, right? That they're now kind of canonizing by putting it into the story. But whoever sheds the blood of a human, and that's dam ha'adam, right? So there's, let me pull up the Hebrew there. That's not quite it, but it's interesting because there's also some play. There's a little bit of play in terms of the word blood, which is dam, and then human, which is Adam. they're not related etymologically speaking, but yeah, so sorry, bear with me. Shofech dam ha'adam, right? So the blood of the human. Ba'adam damo. So we have this, like, there's this really heavy dam thing going on, but it's Adam. It's human. Adam, human, in the translations, right? Whoever sheds the blood of a human, by a human shall that person's blood be shed. For in its own image, and the translation says, ki b'tselem, so in the image, Adonai yasa et ha'adam. So in God's image, or in the image of God, he formed et, direct object, ha'adam. So it's human, and everywhere else we have that often translated as a name instead. So I'm not trying to make a big deal of it, but I am just trying to point out that this language bit and the translation choices continues, right? Okay. And then, and I think I noted this last week, and then we'll move on. Right after that, the story says, and you be fruitful and multiply, abound on the earth and have dominion over it. So the command, the story, the command that was given in Genesis 1:22 to the animals of the sea and the birds of the air, and then in Genesis 1:28 to the humans and the land animals, be fruitful and multiply, abound on the earth. And then, of course, assuming only to the humans, have dominion over it. But this idea of being fruitful and multiplying, right? That line makes sense in the light of creation stories, initial things. God has just destroyed the everything from the face of the earth and then go start over, right? That makes sense. That idea of being fruitful, go do the thing that you biologically already know how to do, right? But this isn't about marriage, right? And it is about, people think it's about marriage in Genesis 1:28. They read that onto it. I don't think that's what they're trying to do in Genesis 1. They're not trying to talk about a human institution. They're talking about what happens naturally, right? So I think it's helpful to point out that this also happens in other places, right? So not about marriage, not specifically trying to talk about marriage when you're talking about being fruitful, right? Okay. So, and then there's another covenant is pronounced, and that's the one with the rainbow, yada, yada. Okay. And I know so we're moving on now to post-flood. Okay. I know I've done this before, but we're going to also keep reading afterwards. So I won't dwell on this, I guess, for too long, since I have done it before, but you might not have seen that version. So let me just, let me get this going here. So I've removed the Hebrew, so I'm not going to be able to go back and forth quickly to look at translations. Let's see, can I see? Okay, it's fun. I'm glad you guys are here and chatting. I appreciate that. Okay, so now after the promises, the sons of Noah who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Yeah, I know I've done a video on this because Ham, like the mark of Ham or the curse of Ham is a kind of thing, and it's, I think, highly misunderstood what's going on in the story originally. A lot of people want to take this literally instead of taking it figuratively, and the descendants of each of these three sons kind of populate the near regions around these people, which is obviously silly, right? Because we know that, Egyptians, Assyrians long predate, right? The point in time that's being narrated. So, all right, I have some bug bites that are itching me. I'll try to sit still. Okay, so anyway, so we'll just roll with the story, right? And then we'll keep going into the part that comes next, which I think is really fun. So the sons of Noah who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was peopled, right? Obviously we know this isn't true, and it'd be nice if teenagers were pulled aside and said, this is metaphorical. Like, we told you as a kid it's real, but now we just want to make sure this is just metaphorical. Noah, a man of the soil, was the first to plant a vineyard. He drank some of the wine and became drunk, and he lay uncovered in his tent. We could have the conversation about, it actually takes several years for a vineyard to produce grapes good enough to make wine, but we're not going to dwell on these details because this is just fun fantasy, right? And Ham, the father of Canaan, notice how many different times that's said, right? Saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. This is the verse that this kind of what's going on in this passage in terms of Ham hinges upon. Okay, so seeing the nakedness is it just that he saw the nakedness? There are other places in the Hebrew Bible that talk about seeing the nakedness as a euphemism for having sex with. So there's that. Yikes. So however you want to look at this story, there are interesting reasons to think that Ham did something awful. Like there's just contextual, like in terms of literarily speaking, seeing the nakedness is not just about seeing a naked body. Okay? I'm not a fan of just sweeping it under the carpet, So there's that. Why would he go do that to his own father and then also go tell his own brothers, right? So that's the part that makes some people say he's just sees that his father's drunk, and as some people do when they're drunk, just started unclothing himself to get ready for bed and just passed out in his bed, drunk, like naked, right? That's legit too, right? That's a legitimate way of looking at this, especially if you're nervous about someone important in a story doing something terrible and nefarious, right? So I don't need it to be one way or the other. I think it's important to note that both readings are I see a legitimacy of both readings, okay? And I'm not okay with the one that is rape, okay? So this is the verse, right? It all hinges upon. Then Shem and Japheth, the oldest and the youngest, took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father. So in the story, this is just being a reality. It's not a metaphor or a euphemism, right? Potentially. So there's that, okay? Maybe it is. He just saw dad naked, passed out drunk, and Ham is chuckling like, check out dad. And the other two are like, don't love it, dad, and cover him up, okay? Their faces were turned away and they did not see their father's nakedness. Okay, all right. So within the flow of the story, it's just a matter of Pop's genitals just shouldn't be seen. Okay, right? That's degrading to him for the son to see it. Like all kinds of weird body issues that these ancient people had. Okay, let's just roll with that. Okay. The faces were turned away. They didn't see it. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him. He keeps being mentioned in the middle, but he's the youngest. Okay, sorry about that. Shem and Japheth are the two older ones. Okay, so when Noah woke and he knew what his youngest son had done to him. So that's what brings it back to the first possibility, right? Again, I don't want to get into, I don't need it to be one thing or the other, but there are reasons why. Okay. He said, and this is indented, which means before this story was written in Genesis, these claims or these lines were poetic, or maybe were kind of the kinds of stories that were passed along, or catchphrases that you might even hear kids saying, about other people. And so it's being incorporated in the story. Cursed be Canaan, lowest of slaves shall he be to his brothers. It's an awful thing to say about your own son, and really grandson in this case, because Ham is the father of Canaan according to the story. So Pop is cursing his own grandson because of something his son does to him, and that's just an ancient way of thinking about things. Can we just acknowledge that? Okay. He also said, "Blessed by the Lord my God be Shem, the oldest, and let Canaan be his slave. So Canaan, the grandson, be the slave of Shem and Shem's descendants. May God make space for Japheth, poor middle brother, right? And let him live in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his slave. So that's all kind of indented poetic verse. So the descendants of these sons then are now being set up to be in a certain pecking order, right? And as you'll see in a minute, the Semites, right, come from Shem. Shem, the name Shem actually means name. And Shem, the letter that is either S or Sh is like the same letter. It just depends on which on the context. And so, you know, Semite, Shemite, right? Who knows? I don't know where the word Semitic actually came, if it has connection to this great ancestor's name or not. But we have an etiology story. We have an origin story that says the peoples around in this part of the world, some of them are favored, some of them are not, according to this guy and his God. And so you have this action or non-action or making fun of or whatever he did, Ham, is now being declared and passed along to his children. So verse 28, after the flood, Noah lived 350 years. All the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. Thank goodness, right? Let's move on. But then we get the nations descended from Noah. So this might be a little bit of a snoozer for some of you, which is totally understandable. But I'm going to read through it anyway because it's in there. And this, to me, is, anyway, this isn't as interesting to me as the other genealogies we read last week because it doesn't really matter why. Anyway, I'm going to read through this list of names. Okay, so chapter 10 starts this way. These are the descendants of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Children were born to them after the flood. Okay, so the descendants of Japheth, the middle son, right? Don't ask me why he's listed first, but he is. Gomer, Magog, Madai, Yavan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. The descendants of Gomer, so the first in that list of 7. Ashkenaz, Riphtah, and Togarma. The descendants of the second, Yavan, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Rodanim. From these, the coastland peoples spread, right? So these are the descendants of Japheth in their lands, with their own language, by their families in their nations. So those names then are the heads of those tribes. The people that come from them then are going to be named according to those names, the heads of the tribes. The descendants of Ham, the one who was naughty in whatever way, are Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan, or Canaan. Egypt, you know what that is, and Canaan, you know what that is. And Cush and Put are Ethiopia. It cracks me up that I always do this. And then perhaps farther east, and like Persia, that kind of thing. So groups of people that the Israelites will need to contend with. I feel the need to double check something because it never sticks in my memory accurately, and then I feel like I'm gonna misspeak, and then that's terrible. And so let me just check this really quickly. I've tried really hard to sock it away in my memory, and I keep forgetting or keep getting it wrong. So let me just be clear. Yeah. So the descendants of Ham are in the Egyptian orbit, right? Let's see. Canaan. Why are you not telling me where these are? Sorry about that. Okay. So, right. So northern Africa, essentially, right? Namibia? I'm so sorry. I don't want to say the wrong thing. So, Cush is Ethiopia, and Put is the one I always forget. So, wherever that is. It's nearby. Don't hold it against me, okay? The point is, right, these are people, I lost my place here. I'm scrolling through. These are people who will be not enemies, but will be the Israelites will need to contend with over the centuries, right? So the descendants of Cush, Sheba, Havilah, Sabta, Raamah, and Sabteka. The descendants of Ramah, so we're just choosing some of these children, Sheba and Dedan. Cush became the father of Nimrod. He was the first on earth to become a mighty warrior. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. So Akkad is actually where we get the name for Akkadian, right? And so that's farther east or northeast of Canaan, the land of Canaan, certainly north of Africa. From that land, he went into Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Ir, Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah. So Nineveh is the capital, if you will, of the empire or the nation of Assyria. And the Assyrians are the ones who are involved in the story of Jonah. The Assyrians are the ones who come and conquer the northern kingdom of Judah, northern kingdom of Israel in the year 722, right? So they are among the great enemies of Israel, the Assyrians, right? But they also have people and history that long predate the Israelites, okay? Egypt became the father of Ludim, Anamim, Lehabim, Naphtuhim, Pathrusim, Kasluhim, from whom the Philistines come, and Kaphtorim. Canaan became the father of Sidon, which is a city on the coast, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusites, and the Amorites, and the Girgashites, and the Hivites, and the Arkites, and the Sinites, and the Arvadites, and the Gemarites, and the Hamathites, yeah. So all of those are most of those are names that actually come up over and over and over in the Hebrew Bible stories. Afterward, the families of the Canaanites spread abroad. And the territory of the Canaanites extended from Sidon in the direction of Gerar as far as Gaza. These names should sound familiar to you all. And in the direction of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim as far as Lasha. These are the descendants of Ham by their families, their languages, their lands, and their nations. So Ham and all of those peoples that we just heard about are all on the, being legitimized in terms of the descendants of the Israelites, thinking negatively of them. Any sort of negative action towards them would be justified because it was pronounced that by our great ancestor, right, or by the Lord himself, right, that these things are going to be true, that the descendants of Ham will be our slaves. And so we are justified in treating these people this way. To Shem, also, the father of all the children of Eber, the elder brother of Japheth, children were born. The descendants of Shem, Elam, Ashur, Arpachshad, Lud, and Aram. Those are people close by. The descendants of Aram, that's where Armenia is, right? Aram. Uz, Hol, Gether, and Mash. Arpachshad became the father of Shelah, and Shelah became the father of Eber. To Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. So his name in Hebrew is a play on division, the word for division. And his brother's name was Joktan. Joktan became the father of Almodad, Shalef, I did not look at the Hebrew here, Hazarmaveth, Yerah, Hadaram, Uzal, Dikla, Obal, Abimael, Shiva, Ophir, Havilah, and Yobab. All these were the descendants of Yoktan. The territory in which they lived extended from Mishah in the direction of Sephar, in the hill country of the east. These are the descendants of Shem by their families, their languages, their lands, and their nations. So the names become, the eponymous that name is then given to the people and their languages. These are the families of Noah's sons according to their genealogies in their nations, and from these the nations spread abroad on the earth after the flood. And one of my favorite stories to talk about is the Tower of Babel, or however you want to pronounce it, but I just say Babel. And it is only 9 verses, and it is one of the most, it kind of cracks me up, because almost to a person, I can tell in my, I feel like I've said this before, I'm so sorry, but in my intro courses to the Hebrew Bible, which I teach 4 times a year, I can tell who comes from a Christian background, and maybe in particular kind of someone who attended church regularly, because they will immediately think that this story is about human sinfulness and the problem with human, craving or lusting after power, and that God had to put a stop to that. And what's interesting to me is what the story actually says. Which is nothing to do with the humans doing something wrong. And in context, this is, if you think about the people groups we just listed, and all the different empires around them that already existed before the Israelite people kind of came into being, the idea of making a name for yourself in their context is really about survival. It's about being an entity that others need to respect and as legitimate on their own. Making a name for yourself simply means putting a stake in the ground, and this is our people, this is who we are, we're here, this is our territory. It isn't arrogant to want to survive as a people, right? So here's the story. Now, the whole earth had one language. After last chapter, where we just listed about 50 different people groups, and at the end it said these are the people in their languages, their territories, and their nations, right? We just pointed out there's multiple languages, okay? So this is a separate story. This isn't really to do with what we just read through, right? This is a story trying to explain how we get bazillion different languages, right? So it's almost like this story needs to be taken on its own and not read on the heels of chapter 10 like I just did, okay? So we're just clearing the slate. Oh, now, the whole earth had one language and the same words. Wow, can you imagine? And as they migrated from the east, they came upon a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and fire them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone, very solid brick, and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." I'm going to pause and interrupt the story and say, I also hear people say this line about let us build ourselves a city with a tower with its top in the heavens, as if the people are trying to get to heaven, instead of perhaps everybody loves the view from on high, right? The tallest floor in the highest floor in a building is the penthouse, right? It's the sweet spot, right? It's the place to be. The higher you are in a building, the more prestigious you are perceived to be. I love the view from on high. I don't know about you, right? So people are taught to bring the crap and the baggage of original sin from Genesis 2 and 3, how they've been misinformed about what that story is. And so they have this negative view of everything, right? The beginning of chapter 6, the story says that God was disappointed in humanity because they were always evil, only doing evil things, which also hurts me, to say that about humankind, right? And so for that reason, God destroyed everybody and started over with Noah, who was great. Well, then his children should be great, right? And so people are people within Christian traditions, I can't speak to Jewish, I've never heard a Jewish person have a hang up with this, but I also haven't had a whole lot of conversations about it with Jewish folks or in Jewish contexts. But in particular, conservative and really devout Christians have a hang up with humanity. They read negative sinfulness onto people all the time. And this is a story in which, in particular, really bothers me. Because the story itself isn't, the people aren't the problem. God is. So, let's build a tower with its top in the heavens and let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we're going to be scattered. We need to make a name for ourselves so that we can exist. There is nothing wrong with wanting to exist, right? Okay. Instead of being spread all over the place, all of your friends and family all over the place. Okay, so let's move on. The Lord, so they said this, let's build a city, let's make a name for ourselves so we can stay together as a people. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower. I love how humanistic God is in this case, in this story, right? Very similar to the second creation story. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which mortals had built. And the Lord said, look. So who is he talking to, first of all? Other angels or demigods, right? Is this a story out of the polytheistic, moment and, polytheistic thinking? But he's talking to someone. Look, they are one people. And they have all one language. And this, it's only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Oh dear. Come, let us go down and confuse their language there so that they will not understand one another's speech. So I'm just going to go fuck with them. So that they will be spread all over the face of the earth, right? So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore, it was called Babel, which in some verb, let's see, what does the note say? Babel is a play on the verb meaning to confuse, right? Therefore, it was called Babel because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there, the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Okay, in chapter 10, we just read a story about there being dozens of people groups and different languages, right? There's nothing new here. This isn't, the existence of other peoples is a reality that they were aware of, right? So now we have a story that says, how did that come to be? How did that happen that people living across the river from each other speak different languages, right? How is that possible? But most of all, in this story, when you come from a place of things need to be taken literally, I just think God is being an asshole. Like, if you're going to go literal, and I don't think we should go literal, but if you do, pay attention. God is threatened by human potential in this story. Nothing they propose to do will be impossible for them. Oh dear, so it's a fun story, right? If what you're trying to do is explain peoples who might seem related to each other, but live in different parts of the world, right? There are all kinds of things you might want to explain with this story, but certainly different cultural practices, different linguistic practices, that for sure is what they're trying to talk about. But please don't tell me that this story is about human sinfulness, disobedience, arrogance, or trying to get into heaven and take the power of God away from him or something like that, which is something I hear 4 times a year from my students in my intro classes. So I get why people think that. I get why people say that. And it just makes me so sad that their pastors have been misinforming them about this story. Because the story is actually a little more interesting than that, Okay. How are we doing on time? Okay. I'm actually still dealing with a summer cold that happens to be going around this part of the country from what I heard recently. Lots of people are getting this cold, so I'm not sure how long I'll be able to go for today, but we're going to continue reading in chapter 10 here, or excuse me, chapter 11. These are the descendants of Shem. When Shem was 100 years old, he became the father of Arpachshad 2 years after the flood, and Shem lived after the birth of Arpachshad 500 years and had other sons and daughters. We heard about the descendants of Shem in chapter 10, right? So now we're going deeper into the descendants very specifically, because when we get down to the end, we get to Abraham. So, Shem, Arpachshad. When Arpachshad had lived 35 years, he became the father of Shelah, and Arpachshad lived after the birth of Shelah 403 years and had other sons and daughters. But we don't care about them, because all we care about is the story of our patriarch. And I'm saying that like a little bit sarcastically, but also very seriously. This is the point. The point of the story is to talk about Abraham and where he came from, right? So you can call that disrespectful to all the other humans involved if you want, because I think I see the legitimacy of that, but also this is the point of the story. Okay, right? When Shelah had lived 30 years, he became the father of Aber, and I didn't look up the different vowel pointing on that name, but Aber. And Shelah lived after the birth of Aber 403 years and had other sons and daughters, right? Okay, all kinds of branches off the tree here, but we're just focusing on the one. When Aber had lived 34 years, he became the father of Peleg, and Aber lived after the birth of Peleg 430 years and had other sons and daughters, but we don't care about them. When Peleg had lived 30 years, he became the father of Reu, I guess, and Peleg lived after the birth of Reu 209 years and had other sons and daughters, whom we don't care about. And Reu had lived 32 years. He became the father of Serug, and Reu lived after the birth of Serug 207 years and had other sons and daughters, right? We're doing this makes it easy to remember this story. It's a nice filler for a story if you're around the campfire. It makes it easy to pass down the generations. Every now and then I think about this, like how many generations back can I name my own family members, right? Not that many. I could name a few of my great-grandparents, right? So on the positive side, this is a way to pass down your heritage. This is a way to remember things when you repeat things, and you have this other piece that's repeated, or kind of who really cares about these numbers that much, but this is a way to help you pass it along. So when Serug had lived 30 years, he became the father of Nahor, and Serug lived after the birth of Nahor 200 years and had other sons and daughters. When Nahor had lived 29 years, he became the father of Terah. Now we're getting close. And Nahor lived after the birth of Terah 119 years. Oh dear, these are getting cut short. And had other sons and daughters. When Terah had lived 70 years, whoa, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now these are the descendants of Terah. We just listed them. Terah was the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran was the father of Lot. And if you start doing the family tree here, it is a little bit sickening, because of some distant relative things connecting, hooking up here. But not just an ancient thing, right? That happens in royalty, right? Or that's happened in not to justify it, I'm just saying it's happened over the years that people want to keep things in the family, right? So I'm not interested in judging people's choices. It does make me a little bit, a little uncomfortable, because it happens several generations in a row where we see it kind of going to the family to get, anyway. And Haran was the father of Lot. And so we know that Lot ends up traveling around with Abram, right? Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his birth, in Ur of the Chaldeans. And Ur is a city near the combining of the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, right? And so we talk about, when we want to do the story, which is not the same thing as historically accurate things, but when you tell the story of Abraham, you start off by talking about Avram, in the Hebrew Avram, comes from the city of Ur. We talk about it that way, right? Here we go. Avram and Nahor. So Avram and Nahor are brothers, took women, multiple. Well, the name of Avram's woman was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's woman was Milcah, right? So these two brothers took women. She, Milcah, we're talking about Nahor's woman, she was the daughter of Haran. So Milcah is the niece of Nahor, because Haran is Nahor's brother. So Nahor takes his niece, Milcah, as his woman. Okay? Now, Sarai was barren. She had no child. So in the original story about where Sarai comes from, we have no mention of her parentage. It is only in the second story, right? So the chapter that comes right after this is chapter 12, and that's where Abram and Sarai end up in Egypt. And the very first time Abram pimps her out to save himself, he says, pretend you're my sister. In chapter 20 of Genesis, we have a story that backs up that Sarai and Abram are half siblings. But that is not the only story, right? The first story here tells us who knows where she came from, right? The second story fills in the gap and makes them half siblings, okay? So I also get that when people read chapter 12, they tell me that Abram and Sarai are siblings. I'm like, where did you get that? You know, that comes later. You know, that isn't in this story. So anyway, so we have Abram and Nahor have taken women. One of them took a niece as his companion, his partner, and we don't know where Sarai came from, but we do know that she was barren, right? So women are defined by their role using their uterus, right? In chapter 3 of Genesis, we have a pronouncement that there will be striving, there will be suffering around childbearing. I have, for many years, assumed that meant a proclamation on childbirth being painful. And I loved what Sex, Time, and Power, what that book showed me about evolution of humans. Like humans, some of our distant relatives, ancestors, leaned forward a bit more than we do. And so once we became upright, and no longer kind of leaning forward, semi four-legged, like two but four, when you're no longer leaning forward, and that's where the child would gestate, but standing upright, then the pelvic girdle had to shift, right? And so I loved this thing that's played with in that book about, well, when that happened, then childbirth became much more painful for the human being, and that might be what's being played with. Well, but in the Hebrew itself, really what's being talked about there is that women will struggle around the thing of childbearing. So meaning not that childbirth will be painful, but that women will have pain, will have pangs. It will be problematic for women, this issue of needing to be a breeder, needing to bring forth children into the world. That in and of itself is what's being talked about, the struggle desiring children and not having them, perhaps the struggle around rearing them. I don't know that for sure, but the issue is around, this is important. This is a thing that people have said is the main role of women. And to have Sarai first introduced, and then first thing you know about her is that she's barren, is a great example of what I'm talking about, right? The focus is on the uterus and how a woman is or is not able to use it specifically to give a son to the man she belongs to, right? So we have multiple generations of women in Abram's family who struggle to produce children. That's the story. That is the story over and over. Which that, part of chapter 3 kind of sets the stage to expect that, really, right? And in a sense, the issue of women, the issue of human bodies that have uteruses, those humans are often thought of first in terms of their role in providing children, right? Like that is the first thing that people people will focus in on and talk about and think is important to talk about. Do you have children? I know this isn't news to anyone here. Like I know that you all get that, but it's fascinating to me the extent to which this piece is still so important to people. So Sarai was barren. She had no child. Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's woman, and they went out together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there instead of going all the way to Canaan or Canaan. The days of Terah, so the patriarch, Abram's father, were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Fun little story or anecdote for you is I do ask students to read Genesis chapter 12, which is next, and to read through that and write a letter from Sarai to Abram, or Sarah to Abraham, I don't care which you want to call them. And I want, I ask them to address the fact that what's said in the first couple of verses, that there are already people living in the land they've been promised, and that God promises to be a bully in their corner. And then what do you think Sarah would be saying about the way she was treated in Egypt and the fact that Abraham gets rich off of her body? Okay, so I asked them to address those 4 things. And what's really interesting, because of where I'm teaching, there will be people still in high school, fresh out of high school, in their 20s, 30s, sometimes in their 60s, and, the whole range, or older. And I do every now and then have a younger person who will reflect on the fact that Sarai had to leave Ur, and she didn't have a choice in that. It doesn't sound like Abram did either, by the way. It was a decision Terah made, according to the story. He took them all, right? He took Abram, Sarai, and Lot, his grandson, and he left. But what would that have been like for Sarai? Having to leave all of her people, her family. Ur at the time, if you really want to play with this, it's kind of fun because Ur was a thriving city at the time, right? And they're asked to leave to go, it's like leaving New York City to go live in the plains of the Midwest. I don't want to name a specific state, but like to live in, to go from thriving city, people, things, culture, ideas, la, 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 to like nothing and start over. Like, that's a lot to ask of a person. And then they keep relocating. They keep moving. Should we keep going and do, chapter 12. I have not been able to read the comments, just so you know. I'll probably go back through later, see some of the comments, but I'm going to go ahead and read chapter 12 because it what I've just been talking about, it's kind of fun to tie it together. So let's do that. Let's do that really quickly as well. So interesting that this chapter is titled The Call of Abram in the New Revised Standard Version, updated edition. The Call of Abram. Well, that feels very Christianese, like people have a calling in life. The Call of Abram. I I understand they're trying to give it a title and they're trying to make it short, but it really just kind of drives me crazy sometimes. Okay. So Terah has died, so now it's just Abram, his woman, and Lot, and we don't know who else has come with them from Ur, but apparently there might have been other people coming with them, but we don't know. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country," in Haran at this point, "and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." It's quite a promise. I do ask my students to reflect on who makes claims like that. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. I think that's a fun thing to think about and reflect upon. Thank you, Ronan Stag. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And I take it that you are out of here. It is 4 o'clock, so I thought I'd be done here, but around 4. But thank you so much for that, Ronan. Yeah, who talks like that? Who? And in all honesty and seriousness, I ask them to consider that sounds like mob boss language to me. Right? Those who are good to you, I will be good to, and those who curse you, I'm going to curse. Like, really reflect upon that. And people will say things like, "It makes me feel comforted. It makes me feel protected." I get that. I really do. But we're talking about a God here who's making this promise. And when you can say that God will curse your enemies right out of the gate, right? That's a really important and powerful thing to be able to say. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took his woman Sarai and his brother's son Lot and all the possessions that they had gathered and the persons whom they had acquired in Haran. Okay, so Abram owns people already. Just food for thought. And they set forth to go to the land of Canaan. When they had come to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. Verse 6, chapter 12, verse 6, the very opening story of this people, and it states that people are already in the land. Just to be clear. Okay? Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved on to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and invoked the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on by stages toward the Negev. Now, there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt to reside there as an alien, for the famine was severe in the land. And we all know that this is an element of human existence that continues to be real, right? Over the centuries, people migrate because of famine, because of war, because they are being persecuted, because something about where they are living is no longer safe or livable. Happens all the time. But because this is a story about our guy, it's all legitimate, right? When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his woman Sarai, "I know well that you are a woman beautiful in appearance. And when the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his woman.' then they will kill me, but they will let you live. I mean, this is also a little bit like paranoia. Like, is that true? Is that really true? Like, is that really what would happen? I'm not certain that that's actually what would have happened. But it says that, so people like to say that that's what's going to happen. I'm not certain of that. Show me the research that tells us that. Anyway, so say you're my sister, okay? So that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared on your account. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. She's lost her name. She's already lost her name, right? When the officials of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman, not Sarai, the woman, was taken into Pharaoh's house. And for her sake, he dealt well with Abram. And he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female slaves, female donkeys, and camels. So, just so we're clear, he saw her as beautiful, he took her as his own, and for her sake. So does that mean that Sarai was beautiful to behold and he's grateful for this addition to his concubinage? Is it because she happened to be really good in bed that he was quite pleased with her? Like, for which reason? And we don't know. But I think I just like to play around with that because I do have a hard time even getting students to see what's happening here, right? A woman has been handed over from one man to another. Her body is the trade. She's been given, and in return, Pharaoh gives Abram lots of goods. Enslaved peoples, animals, all kinds of great stuff. And she is just a body. She has lost her name, okay? But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you've done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your woman? Why did you say she's my sister so that I took her for my woman? Now then, here's your woman. Take her and be gone." And Pharaoh gave his men orders concerning him, basically, see him out, right? And they set him on the way with his woman and all that he had. I do also have students making the comment that God, the Lord, is being true to his promise from verse 3 because he afflicts Pharaoh and his house. But the reality, just to push back on that, which is something you may have heard before, the reality is that promise was, those who bless you, I will bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. The Pharaoh blessed Abram. He did not curse him. This sending a plague is not about that promise from the beginning of the chapter, right? The plague here is separate from that, at the very least. I think it's also more about the fact that their own descendants, right, the descendants of Pharaoh and the descendants of Abram, are going to come in contact again, according to the narrative, right? Not necessarily historically speaking. They will come in contact again. And so this is perhaps a foreshadowing of that, right? But regardless, it's coming out of nowhere. It isn't expected, and it isn't a justification. There's no justification for this, because the only one who's done something wrong here is Abram, not the Pharaoh, right? So all kinds of fun little elements of this story. And so the Pharaoh gave his men orders concerning him, and they set him on the way with his woman and all that he had. And the word wife showed up in this story many times. I changed it to woman, but we're just in chapter 12, and we've already had husband-wife language, and it doesn't belong in there, So there's that. I'm seeing some really interesting comments here, so I am sorry that I'm not able to kind of put them in the in the feed so everybody can see them. my voice is going. We're coming up on an hour. I am so grateful that so many of you decided to hang out with me this way and hung in there with me through the technical difficulties today. I was ready to go, so I was going to find a way to do this. So thank you all for being here. It's really fun to see familiar names in the chat, and thanks. I guess, yeah, you can watch this live later, or watch the replay, whatever it is. So thanks for being with me. I appreciate that. It's really fun to see you here. And as far as I know, I'll be back again next week. Hopefully I'll have the tech figured out, and I'll see you then. Thanks so much.